A trail of frozen bodies and scorched earth had marked Adrian Volkov's 3-year hunt for vengeance, but it was a chipped ceramic bowl of broth that finally broke the winter czar. He stormed a roadside tomb expecting a massacre, only to find the mother he'd mourned being kept warm by a woman with nothing left to give. The neon sign outside the Midnight Star Diner had flickered its last breath months ago, leaving the open sign to hang like a crooked tooth in a dark mouth. To Elena Rossi, the rhythmic hum of the ancient industrial dishwasher was the only lullaby she knew. It was a soundtrack of 16-hour shifts, the permanent sting of bleach on her raw knuckles, and the suffocating weight of being invisible. Elena was only 24, but in the dim, amber light of the diner, her face carried the quiet, hardened exhaustion of someone who had spent a lifetime being cast out into the cold. She moved with a heavy mechanical grace, wiping down a scarred wooden table with a cloth that was more threads than fabric. Outside, a relentless, icy rain lashed against the windows, blurring the world into a series of jagged, watery shadows. In the corner booth, the only patch of real warmth in the drafty building, sat 6-year-old Sophia. The little girl was quiet, her small fingers tracing the steam rising from a mug of hot water, her legs tucked beneath her to hide the holes in her sneakers. Every time Elena looked at her daughter, a wave of primal terror crashed over her. The foster family who had discarded them like trash was still calling, their threats of legal custody, hanging over Elena's head like a guillotine. The chime of the bell above the door was barely audible over the sudden roar of an engine outside, but Elena didn't need to look up to know who had arrived. She reached for the heavy ceramic bowl she had kept warming on the stove, a meal she'd paid for by skipping her own lunch for 3 days. "You're late tonight, Maria. I was starting to worry the wind got the best of you," Elena said, her voice soft and grounding as she carefully stepped toward the booth. She began to lower the steaming bowl of soup in front of the frail, gray-haired woman, her focus entirely on the gentle act of nurturing, completely unaware that behind her, the glass door had just been kicked inward by a man holding a handgun and a heart made of ice. The walk to the Midnight Star had taken 2 hours that felt like 10. Elena's boots were thin, and by the time she reached the diner's heavy wooden door, she could no longer feel her toes. She didn't look back at the road. She knew the Millers weren't coming to find them. When the front door of their house had clicked shut 3 hours ago, it hadn't sounded like a mistake. It had sounded like a sentence. Inside the diner, the air was thick with the smell of old grease and floor wax. Elena didn't ask the manager for a break. She didn't explain why her 6-year-old daughter was shivering in the corner booth. She simply put on her stained apron and started the coffee. Sophia didn't complain. She just watched the door, her eyes wide and dark, as if expecting the wind to follow them inside. Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her foster father, Mr. Miller. "We found the key in the snow. Don't bother coming back for your things. We've already cleared the room. Hope the tip jar is full tonight." Elena didn't reply. She couldn't. Her fingers were too stiff to type. She tucked the phone away and focused on the stove. She poured a ladle of thick, vegetable broth into a chipped white bowl. It was her own shift meal, the only thing she was allowed to eat for the next 8 hours. She didn't take a single sip. Instead, she carried it toward the back of the room. Maria was already there. The older woman sat perfectly still, her silver hair neatly braided despite the dirt on her coat. She looked like a queen who had lost her way. When Elena set the bowl down, Maria didn't reach for the spoon. She reached for Elena's hand. Her skin was like parchment, but her grip was surprisingly firm. "You have the same eyes as your mother," Maria whispered. Her voice was thin, but it held a strange, sudden clarity. Elena paused. She had never mentioned her mother to anyone in this town. "You should eat, Maria. It's cold out there." "The cold is just a blanket for people who want to hide," Maria replied, her eyes drifting toward the window. Before Elena could ask what she meant, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail. She stepped into the kitchen to listen. It was Mrs. Miller's voice, sharp and cold. The social worker called to check in. I told her you ran off again. If you want to see Sophia tomorrow, you'd better start thinking about how much that's worth to us. Elena leaned against the cold metal of the prep table. She looked through the service window at Sophia, who was now leaning her head against Maria's shoulder. Two people with nothing, holding on to each other. Elena realized then that the Millers weren't just letting her go. They were setting a trap. She wasn't just working for rent anymore. She was working for a ransom. Adrian Volkov sat in the back of the armored SUV, watching the windshield wipers struggle against the thickening ice. He didn't look at the city lights fading behind him. He looked at a small, wrinkled scrap of paper in his gloved hand. It was a 3-year-old habit. For 1,000 days, he had chased shadows, followed ghosts, and dug into empty ground. Every lead had ended in a lie or a grave. His men called him the Tsar because he ruled with a heart of stone, but his silence tonight was different. It wasn't the silence of a king. It was the silence of a man who was running out of time. His advisors had told him to stop months ago. They whispered that Maria Volkov was dead, buried in the rubble of the warehouse explosion that had started the war. Adrian had responded by burning down the businesses of anyone who dared to agree with them. "The storm is getting worse, sir," his driver, Victor, said softly. "The roads to the north are closing. If the tip is wrong again, we might get stuck." Adrian didn't blink. He watched a drop of condensation slide down the bulletproof glass. "Then we get stuck." He reached into his coat pocket and felt the cold steel of his weapon. It was a familiar weight, but his fingers felt heavy. He wasn't thinking about the Petrov syndicate or the territory he was leaving unguarded. He was thinking about the way his mother used to hum when she gardened. He had almost forgotten the tune. A tablet glowed in the seat beside him. A grainy, low-resolution photo from a gas station camera sat on the screen. It showed a thin woman in a tattered coat, her face partially hidden by a hood. The data tag placed her at a truck stop called the Midnight Star just 6 hours ago. It was a weak lead, the kind that usually cost him a week of sleep and $1 million in fuel. But there was something about the way the woman in the photo held herself. She looked tired, but she didn't look defeated. "Sir," Victor spoke again, his voice tighter. "Our scouts report Petrov's men are moving. They've picked up our trail. They think we're heading to a meeting." Adrian finally turned his head. His eyes were as gray as the storm outside. "Let them think that. If they follow us to that diner, make sure none of them leave it." He looked back at the scrap of paper. He had spent 3 years looking for a body to bury. As the SUV lurched through a deep snowdrift, he realized for the first time that he was terrified of actually finding her alive. He didn't know what a man like him would say to a woman like her. He just knew that if she was in that diner, the world was about to end for anyone standing in his way. The peace of the diner didn't break all at once. It started with a sound that didn't belong, the sharp, rhythmic pop of gunfire echoing through the heavy sheets of ice. Elena froze with the soup bowl still in her hands. She looked toward the front window just as a line of black SUVs skidded into the parking lot, their headlights cutting through the whiteout like searchlights. In the corner, Maria didn't flinch at the noise. She simply looked at Elena and whispered, "The hunters are here." The front window disintegrated. A spray of glass diamonds showered the booths, sparkling in the dim light before hitting the floor. Elena acted before she could think. She dropped to her knees, pulling Maria down with her, shielding the older woman's frail body with her own. She could hear Sophia's small gasp from the kitchen, but she couldn't move toward her. The air was suddenly filled with the smell of ozone and burnt rubber. The heavy front door was kicked off its hinges. Adrian Volkov stepped through the frame, his dark suit dampened by the freezing rain. He moved with a terrifying, calculated speed, his handgun raised and steady. He was looking for a fight, his eyes darting toward the shadows where Petrov's gunmen were surely hiding. He had come here to finish a war, to find the people who had stolen his life. Then he stopped. He didn't just slow down, he became a statue mid-step. His weapon lowered an inch, then two. The dominant, dangerous man who had just stormed into a battlefield suddenly looked like he had seen a ghost. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His eyes were locked on the floor behind the counter. There, among the broken glass and the spilled broth, was a waitress in a worn apron. Her arms were wrapped tightly around an elderly woman whose silver hair was unmistakable even in the chaos. Elena wasn't looking at the guns or the masked men outside. She was looking at Maria, her body curved into a protective shield, her face set in a look of quiet, desperate defiance. Adrian looked at his mother, the woman he had spent 3 years mourning, and then at the stranger who was risking everything to keep her safe. The contrast was a physical blow. His world was made of bullets and betrayal, but here, in the middle of the wreckage, was a bowl of hot soup and a woman who didn't even know his name. Outside, the shooting continued, but the diner had gone silent. Adrian's grip on his gun loosened until it hung at his side. He realized then that Petrov's men weren't his biggest problem. The new development was the realization that he owed his mother's life to a person he had almost killed just by walking through the door. For the first time in his life, the Tsar didn't know who to shoot first. The shooting outside stopped as quickly as it had begun, replaced by the heavy silence of the snow. Adrian's men moved through the diner like shadows, locking the doors and pulling the blinds. Adrian himself did not move. He stood over the booth, his shadow stretching across the floor. He watched Elena stand up slowly, her hands shaking as she brushed glass from her apron. "Who are you working for?" Adrian's voice was low, like a blade sliding over silk. Elena didn't look at him. She looked at Sophia, who was peeking out from the kitchen. "I'm the night waitress," she said. Her voice was thin but steady. Adrian narrowed his eyes. In his world, no one did anything for free. Kindness was just a mask for a bigger price tag. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick leather checkbook. He laid it on the grease-stained table. "I know how this works," Adrian said. "The Petrovs found her, and they put you here to wait for me. Tell me the truth, and I will write a number that will change your life. You can take your daughter and leave this place forever. You'll never have to scrub another floor." Elena looked at the checkbook, then at the man who held it. She didn't see a savior. She saw another version of the Millers, someone who thought they could own her. She looked down at the floor, where a pool of broth and blood from a gunman's grazed shoulder was spreading toward Maria's shoes. "I need a mop," Elena said quietly. Adrian paused, his pen hovering over the paper. "Did you hear me? I'm offering you a way out of this dirt." "The dirt is going to stain her coat," Elena replied, pointing to Maria. "And the glass is dangerous for my daughter. I don't want your money. I want you to move so I can clean up this mess." Adrian felt a strange shift in his chest. He had spent years dealing with people who would kill for a fraction of what he was offering. He watched Elena walk to the supply closet, her back turned to him. She wasn't afraid of his gun. She was worried about the cleanliness of a dying diner. He looked at Maria, who was watching Elena with a faint, knowing smile. Maria reached out and touched the checkbook, pushing it back toward Adrian. "She doesn't know who we are, Adrian," Maria whispered. "And that is why she is the only one you can trust." Adrian closed the checkbook. He realized then that the ransom wasn't something he could pay with money. The real pressure came from a new realization. The Petrovs hadn't planted Elena here. They were following him. He hadn't arrived to save his mother. He had brought the war right to her doorstep. By staying in this diner, he had turned Elena and her daughter into the ultimate targets. The sound of the mop bucket's wheels squeaking against the floor was the only thing filling the silence until a pair of headlights cut through the frosted windows. A rusted sedan fishtailed into the lot, stopping inches away from Adrian's sleek black SUVs. Elena stopped scrubbing. She recognized the dented hood and the way the engine groaned before dying. The Millers stepped into the diner, squinting against the dim light. Mr. Miller didn't look at the broken glass or the armed men standing by the kitchen. He didn't even look at the guns. His eyes went straight to the expensive watches on Adrian's men. "Elena, honey," Mrs. Miller said, her voice high and trembling with a forced sweetness. "We've been sick with worry. We saw the lights and the police cars on the scanner. We came as fast as we could to get you and the little one home." Elena gripped the mop handle, so hard her knuckles turned white. She moved her body an inch to the left, blocking their view of the kitchen where Sophia was hiding. "You told me the room was cleared," she said quietly. Now, we were just upset," Mr. Miller said, stepping closer. He finally looked at Adrian, his eyes darting from the tailored suit to the bulge of a holster under the jacket. He wiped his palms on his jeans. "I'm the girl's guardian. Legal-like. If there's been trouble here, we should probably take her and go. Unless there's a reason for us to stay and help settle things." Adrian sat in the booth, his fingers drumming a slow, steady beat on the table. He didn't stand up. He didn't even look at the Millers. He looked at the way Elena's breathing had become shallow and fast. He saw the sheer terror in the way she glanced toward the kitchen. "You're the ones who locked her out in a blizzard," Adrian said. "It wasn't a question. It was a family matter," Mr. Miller snapped, trying to find his courage. "Who are you?" Adrian finally looked up. His gaze was so cold it seemed to drop the temperature in the room. "I'm the man who just realized why this woman is so afraid of help." He turned to one of his men. "Check their car. See if they have any of the girl's belongings." "You can't do that," Mrs. Miller barked. Adrian ignored her. He looked at Elena. "They didn't come for you. They saw the cars and thought there was money to be made." Elena didn't answer. She was watching Mr. Miller reach into his pocket and pull out a folded yellow paper, Sophia's original placement documents. It was a silent threat. If she didn't play along, they would use the law to take the only thing she had left. "We're leaving," Mr. Miller said, his voice gaining a greasy confidence. "And the kid is coming with us. Elena, get your coat." Elena looked at Adrian, her eyes pleading for a silence he wasn't giving. Then she looked at the yellow paper. She dropped the mop. It hit the floor with a dull thud. "I'll go," she whispered. "Just leave the girl here for 5 minutes so I can say goodbye." She had made a choice. She would sacrifice herself to the Miller's cruelty if it meant Sophia stayed in the warmth of the diner, even if it was guarded by a monster. Adrian watched her, his face unreadable, but his hand stopped drumming. He realized the vultures were more dangerous to Elena than the hitmen outside because they knew exactly where she was broken. The Millers were escorted to a corner booth by 2 of Adrian's men, their greedy whispers silenced by the sight of a handgun resting casually on a nearby table. Elena stood by the counter, her arms wrapped around herself, watching the front door as if she could see the legal threats swirling in the snow. Adrian didn't look at the Foster family. He stayed focused on Maria, who was humming a low, tuneless song while tracing the pattern of the wood grain on the table. "Her name isn't Maria," Adrian said. He spoke quietly, but his voice cut through the hum of the refrigerator. "It's Maria Volkov. In certain parts of the world, people bow when she enters a room. They call her the Queen of the North." Elena turned slowly. She looked at the old woman who had spent months eating $3 soup and shrugging off the cold. The word queen didn't fit the woman who liked extra crackers and always said thank you with a shaky smile. Elena realized the expensive habits she had noticed. The way Maria held a spoon or the way she touched fine fabric weren't accidents. She had been feeding a woman who owned half the city. "Why would a woman like that be here?" Elena asked. She looked at the dirt under Maria's fingernails. "Why would she stay in a place like this?" "I spent 3 years thinking she was kidnapped or dead," Adrian replied. He leaned in closer to his mother, his eyes searching hers for a spark of recognition. "I burned down entire neighborhoods looking for her. I thought her mind was gone, destroyed by the explosion. Maria stopped humming. She looked up, not at Adrian, but at Elena. For a second, the fog in her eyes seemed to vanish. It was a sharp, clear look, the look of a woman who knew exactly where she was. The soup was better than the wine, wasn't it? Maria said softly. Adrian froze. He looked at his mother, his brow furrowed. The dementia had been the reason he felt he had to rescue her, but that one sentence changed everything. He began to wonder if his mother hadn't been lost at all. He wondered if she had chosen the silence of the diner to escape the violence of the palace he had built for her. The pressure in the room shifted. Adrian realized he wasn't just fighting the Petrovs or the Millers. He was fighting his mother's own will. He looked at Elena, seeing her not as a waitress, but as the person who had given his mother the one thing he couldn't, a life where no one was afraid. She stayed because you were the only one who didn't want anything from her, Adrian realized aloud. Elena looked at the queen, and then at the Tsar. She felt a new kind of fear. She wasn't just caught between a foster family and a mob boss anymore. She was holding the key to a secret that a powerful man might kill to keep. The fact that his mother preferred a life of poverty over a life with him. The light in the diner didn't just go out. It died with a violent pop. The ancient transformer outside, already struggling against the ice, groaned one last time before the room plunged into a suffocating blackness. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the wind screaming through the shattered front window. Then, the back door screamed open. Elena felt the rush of cold air before she heard the footsteps. She didn't scream. She reached for the counter, her fingers searching for the spot where Sophia had been sitting moments ago. Her hand met only empty air. Elena! Sophia's voice was a sharp, muffled cry that was quickly cut off. In the darkness, the red dots of laser sights danced across the walls like fireflies. Adrian was on his feet instantly, the clicking of his weapon a dry, lethal sound in the dark. He didn't fire. He couldn't. The foster father's voice rose above the chaos, shaking but desperate. "We have the girl," Mr. Miller shouted from the kitchen entrance. "Petrov says if you want her back, you drop the guns and let us walk. He's paying us more for the kid than you ever would, Volkov." The betrayal was a physical weight in the air. The Millers hadn't just been waiting for a bribe. They had been acting as a beacon for the hitmen circling the building. Elena felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the blizzard. She felt Adrian's hand grab her shoulder, pulling her down behind the heavy oak counter. "They're moving toward the cellar," Adrian whispered. His breath was hot against her ear, the only warmth in the room. "The Petrovs don't want a standoff. They want leverage. If they get her into the tunnels under this place, she's gone." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind went quiet. She knew the Midnight Star better than anyone. She knew the floorboards that creaked and the ones that stayed silent. She knew the service tunnel didn't lead to the road. It led to the old meat locker that locked only from the outside. "I can get behind them," Elena whispered back. "There is a narrow crawl space behind the dishwasher. But I need you to keep them looking at the front." Adrian looked at her. Even in the dark, his eyes were sharp. He saw the shift in her, the moment the waitress became a mother who was done being afraid. He realized he didn't need to protect her. He needed to follow her lead. "You have 60 seconds, Adrian said, checking the glowing watch on his wrist. "When I start shooting at the ceiling, you move. If you miss your window, I have to level this building. Do you understand?" Elena didn't nod. She simply let go of his arm and vanished into the shadows of the kitchen. She wasn't just running for her daughter anymore. She had decided that the Queen Maria and the Tsar Adrian weren't the only ones who could decide how this night ended. She was playing her own game now. The first shot from Adrian's gun didn't hit a person. It hit the heavy copper pipes running along the ceiling. A cloud of scalding steam hissed into the air, filling the diner with a white fog that blinded the hitmen. It was the signal. Elena moved. She didn't crawl. She flowed through the narrow gap behind the industrial dishwasher, a space she had cleaned 1,000 times. She knew exactly where the floor dipped and where the rusted metal of the vent would groan. While Adrian provided the lead, a rhythmic, terrifying display of fire that kept the Petrov men pinned behind the booths, Elena provided the fire. She reached the breaker box in the kitchen and didn't flip the power back on. Instead, she grabbed a canister of industrial degreaser and splashed it across the floor near the back exit. She struck a match. A wall of blue flame erupted, blocking the path to the cellar. In the confusion, Elena saw them. Mr. Miller was dragging Sophia toward the side door, his face twisted in a mask of panicked greed. Elena didn't scream. She stepped out of the shadows and threw a heavy porcelain plate at the light fixture above his head. The glass shattered, and for a second Miller hesitated. That second was all Elena needed. She lunged, snatching Sophia's hand and pulling her into the safety of the walk-in freezer, just as Adrian's men breached the kitchen. When the lights finally flickered back on, the diner was a wreck, but the silence was absolute. The hitmen were gone or subdued. The Millers stood in the center of the room, surrounded by men in dark suits. They weren't bleeding, but they were trembling. Adrian stepped forward, his suit jacket ruined, and his expression unreadable. He didn't raise his gun. Instead, he pulled a thin digital tablet from his pocket. "I called my people while you were hiding in the dark," Adrian said to Mr. Miller. His voice was cold and flat. "You owe $200,000 to various predatory lenders. Your house is already in foreclosure. The Petrovs didn't pay you yet, did they?" Miller paled. We were just trying to survive." "Now you belong to me," Adrian said. He tapped a command on the screen and then handed the tablet to Elena. "I have bought every cent of their debt. I own their house, their cars, and their future. They are no longer a legal threat to you, Elena. In fact, if they ever breathe your name again, you can decide which of their creditors calls in the debt." Elena looked at the screen. She saw the numbers that had kept these people in power over her for years. She looked at the Millers, who were now smaller than they had ever been. She didn't feel a rush of joy. She felt a strange, heavy weight. Adrian wasn't just giving her freedom, he was giving her a weapon. "Go," Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't look at the tablet again. "Just go." As the Millers fled into the storm, Elena realized the new truth of her life. Adrian had cleared the path, but he had also tethered her to his world. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a woman with the power to ruin lives, and that realization was more frightening than the guns. The Volkov Manor was a fortress of marble and glass, sitting high above the city where the storm was now only a distant blur. Inside, the air didn't smell like grease or old rain. It smelled of beeswax and expensive lilies. Elena sat on the edge of a velvet sofa, her rough, reddened hands looking out of place against the fabric. Sophia was finally asleep in a room upstairs, tucked under more blankets than they had ever owned. Adrian stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring at the lights of the city he had nearly burned down in his search. He looked tired. The dominant edge of his shoulders had softened. He wasn't looking for enemies anymore. He was looking for a way to talk to the woman sitting 10 feet away. Maria entered the room, no longer wearing the tattered rags of a drifter. She wore a simple, elegant silk robe, but she still walked with the same quiet, observant grace Elena had seen in the diner. She didn't go to her son. She walked straight to Elena and sat beside her. "You're wondering why a queen would hide in a truck stop," Maria said, her voice rich and steady. She reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a small, tattered silver locket. She placed it in Elena's palm. Elena opened it. Inside wasn't a picture of Adrian or the late Volkov king. It was a grainy, faded photo of a young woman with the same fierce, protective eyes as Elena. "That was your mother, Lucia," Maria whispered. 25 years ago, I was the one being hunted. My car went off a mountain road in a storm, just like this one. Your mother was a waitress at a diner that no longer exists. She hid me in her basement for 3 days while the men with guns searched the town. She never asked for a cent. She just kept the fire going. Elena touched the photo, her heart skipping a beat. I thought she died when I was a baby. I thought I was alone. You were never alone, Maria said, looking at Adrian. I found you a year ago. I knew the Millers were vultures, and I knew my son's world was too violent for a child like Sophia. I didn't stay at the Midnight Star because I was lost, Elena. I stayed because I was waiting for the right moment to take you away from them without Adrian turning your life into a battlefield. I was protecting you. Adrian turned from the window, his face pale. He realized then that his 3-year hunt hadn't been a pursuit of a victim. His mother had been the one in control, leading him on a trail that ended exactly where she wanted, at the feet of the daughter of the woman who had saved her. Adrian thought he was the hunter, but he was just the son being led home by the 2 women who knew that the greatest power isn't found in a gun, but in the person who refuses to let the fire go out.